Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the debrief. This week, Pope Francis turns his attention to the United States. We're also going to cover his papal trip to Mongolia, and an entire family is beatified. This and more in just a second. Hey, Mike, welcome to the show. Busy couple of weeks, hasn't it been?
Yeah, sorry about last week. Things are just getting away from us and back to school and oh my goodness. But I think the Monday afternoon schedule, let's
They
try
get
to
worse.
stick to
Well,
it.
this is what happens when volunteers show up and try to cover church news, is you just get slammed with the amount of questions and follow-up articles and stuff. So thanks to everybody who has been supporting this journey so far. Stay tuned to the end for an invite to continue supporting us. So welcome to the debrief. It's a weekly show where we talk about news, questions, and controversies facing the Catholic Church. I'm Dominic DeSouza, the founder of Smart Catholics.
And I'm Mike Lewis, the co-founder and editor of Where Peter Is.
All right, let's get into today's stories. We have the Holy Father and Archbishop Pierre have turned their attention to the United States. So, Mike, it's an ongoing story. But since our last episode, there's been a lot of discussion coming from Pope Francis and Archbishop Pierre regarding the opposition to the Synod in the U.S. Church. Are you suggesting they're paying more attention to it than usual?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember where we left off a couple of weeks ago. I believe at that point, Father Antonio Spadaro, we talked about how that dialogue with the Portuguese Jesuits had been released. The conversation took place in early August, but it was a publication of this private conversation that took place I believe it was immediately before the Pope left for Mongolia. But then on the way to Mongolia, and then during the press conference on the way home, Pope Francis was asked specifically about U.S. Catholics. He talked a lot about ideologies. Another thing is that Archbishop Pierre, who is the U.S. Papal Nuncio to the United States, he's going to become a cardinal at the end of the month. He's originally from France. He's 77 or 78 years old. He's approaching 80, but he'll still be a voting cardinal. And usually the tradition is that nuncios aren't made cardinals until they come home. But it turns out that two nuncios, both Archbishop Pierre and the nuncio to Italy, are both being made cardinals. Archbishop Pierre was in Rome. He was interviewed by Vatican News, and he was asked about the American Church and what was holding the American Church back. And obviously there was a lot of talk about fear about the upcoming Synod, rumors, false narratives, these ideas that the Synod is going to change church doctrine. It's a message that keeps coming forward. Bishop Strickland has made it sort of the centerpiece of hopefully the tail end of his time in Tyler, Texas. And there are a lot of other bishops and bloggers and columnists and social media personalities that are trying to, I believe, spread fear among the American Catholic population. Good people who are well-intentioned, people who want to live out their faith. There's this narrative that something bad is going to happen at the Synod. And so, yeah, it seems to be mounting. The Synod is less than a month away, and I think that they are just preparing for something to happen.
So there was a book that was sent out to every deacon, priest, and bishop in the United States with a foreword by Cardinal Burke, and it called the Synod on Synodality a, quote, Pandora's box.
Yes. So basically what Cardinal Raymond Burke, who we've written about many times for years, he's probably the highest ranking opponent of Pope Francis. He's consistently against Pope Francis. He seems to reject everything that Pope Francis teaches, envisions, says. He recently, in this, he wrote a foreword to a book that was published by the by tradition, family, and property, which is, I guess you could say, it's a far right nationalist traditionalist group that originated in Brazil, but it's also present in the United States. The book is it's 100 question and answers about church doctrine and the Synod and so forth. But it's somewhat amazing that this mass mailing campaign from this group that's been condemned by the Brazilian bishops for decades, that they so openly are publishing this book, sending it to everyone, and that a cardinal of the Catholic Church was willing to sign on to it, endorse it, write the forward to it, and all it does is, I mean, it demonizes. It's the same rhetoric that's been going on for the last couple of years, but it's an attack on the Synod. I know you have some insight into the organization. I don't know if you have anything to add, or to the idea that they're doing this mass mailing campaign on the eve of the Synod. I mean, I can only think that their intention is to influence pastors, so that when they preach about the Synod, or when they think about the Synod, or when they talk to parishioners about the Synod, they will have this fear-based response for this.
Yeah. Well, I haven't read it, but it seems like it's an extremely smart way to go about spreading the viewpoint, going with a Q&A format, and they've always excelled at having a really good sense of marketing, fantastic sense of strategy. So as you've pointed out in the past, this whole sense of we need to just deny them the oxygen and stop paying attention to them, it hasn't worked, and I echo you on that one. It hasn't worked. It's just given them privacy, I guess, to just forge ahead. And now we're seeing them all come out, and it's very annoying how they're setting the tone, especially online. They're setting the tone online for what it means to be Catholic in the United States. Hence the Holy Father's attention now, being focused on this.
And I think that's one of the things that they're going for. They're trying to use, well, what's wrong with promoting Catholic doctrine, or are you saying that you're for this? And it's not just TFP, but it's other organizations. It's just like Bishop Strickland, who followed up his pastoral letter that we talked about last time with another pastoral letter that went into more issues. It was to me, it's they get very defensive, and they have strategies for fighting back. When I wrote about Scott Hahn, I didn't use inflammatory language. I mean, you know where I'm coming from. You know that I am pro-Francis. If you're anti-Francis and you read that article that I wrote about Scott Hahn, you should understand, okay, this guy supports Pope Francis, so he's not on my side. I gave facts, and you should have been happy. Oh, Scott Hahn supports what I do, But for some reason, the fact that I made public something that my guess is the people who criticized me probably already knew or suspected about Scott Hahn, it strikes me as a tactic. People weren't linking back to me. They weren't naming me. They were just saying Scott Hahn is this great holy Catholic who has never said insulting things about the Pope, and this evil revolutionary leftist is trying to destroy his reputation. But I don't think I said anything that was unfair. I don't think I said anything that was untrue. And so it's interesting what they see as an attack, and how they are able to defend their position. They try to take this position of orthodoxy, but the fact of the matter is, if orthodoxy is following the magisterium, which is the Pope and the bishops in communion with him, they are not orthodox. They're heterodox, in some cases heretical. And the fact that they're encouraging people to break from what the Pope is teaching and to ignore his authority, that's the road to schism. And as we've discussed before, and as I've written before, Bishop Strickland, who's on board with this program, has redefined the term schism multiple times. He's supposedly a canon lawyer. He supposedly follows the catechism. And both of them teach that schism is the refusal to grant submission to the Roman pontiff. And yet every single time he talks about schism, he says the real schism is breaking with the deposit of faith, or the real schism is opposing. And it's like, no, that's not the definition of schism. Has to do with the relationship between people. And from the Catholic point of view, it specifically has to do with your relationship with the Pope. You are a Catholic in good standing. You are in full communion with the Pope. But they're trying to use this fear-based series of attacks on the Pope. And I think that the end result is, unfortunately, it looks like we're headed towards schism. Anyway.
So, speaking of people in a difficult spot, maintaining orthodoxy with the Holy Father, the Holy Father has visited Mongolia and back. Can you share some of the highlights of this trip and the impact it had?
Yeah, and just because of timing, we didn't really have a lot of time to talk about his trip to Mongolia, but it was the first time that a pope has ever set foot in the country. Where Peter is, we wrote a few articles or highlighted other articles that were talking about the very, very small Catholic community. First of all, it's a country that is vast and wide. It's landlocked. It's bordered by Russia in the north, China in the south. They have more livestock than people. I think I heard they have 33 million livestock and 3.3 million people or something like that. And their Catholic community started in 1992 from nothing, no priests, no churches. And they have about 1,500 or less Catholics in the entire country. Now, from the perspective of Mongolia, which is their majority Buddhist, but it's, if you look at the demographics, it's something like 51% Buddhist, 40% non-religious, and then it goes down from there. But they are a peace-loving people. That was something that Pope Francis emphasized. They are looking to have their to be known as a country separate from Russia, separate from China. This visit
out of all the different countries, why visit Mongolia?
Well, obviously Pope Francis goes to the peripheries. One thing that he said, he hasn't visited the great European capitals. He hasn't been to Paris. He hasn't been to London. He hasn't been to Berlin. He hasn't been. I mean, obviously he's in Rome. He hasn't been to Madrid. Wait, yeah, no, I don't think he's been to Madrid. Obviously, Lisbon was World Youth Day, but he really wants to reach out to the peripheries. The head of the Mongolian Church, he made a cardinal last year. He's a young Italian cardinal, but they're starting to have their own seminarians. They're starting to have their own vocations. It's a small and committed church it's made up of converts to the Catholic faith. And one of the things that he emphasized, that Pope Francis has emphasized and the church has emphasized, is that they've come in and they've tried to improve the lives of the people in the communities. It's growth by attraction. It's, as opposed to proselytism, it's, what are these Christians all about? These Christians did this thing that impressed me. And they just started he inaugurated a mercy center. I guess it's a Catholic Charities type institution. They offer education, but they aren't trying to proselytize, which impresses the Mongolians. And so they've had a little bit of success in their little bit of history. And I think that this visit was definitely well timed. Also sent a message to Russia and to China. He actually called Cardinal Tong, who's the Hong Kong emeritus cardinal, and Bishop Stephen Chow, who is the current Bishop of Hong Kong, who's going to be named a cardinal along with Archbishop Pierre, called them onto the stage, or into the sanctuary at the end of the main mass, and introduced them and said, Catholics love China. Chinese Catholics love their country. This is something that Cardinal Tong in his writing has actually discussed a lot, is that Catholics in China aren't looking to overthrow the country. They aren't looking to violate their Chinese culture. They want to be good Chinese citizens. They just want to have the right to practice their faith. And I think it was a good example of that. There were a number of Chinese Catholics who actually Now, none of the mainland bishops were allowed to go to Mongolia. That
Mhm.
at the last minute, a few, I think, were denied
Okay.
the permission to go, but there were some Chinese Catholics who went there. And the Chinese government has gotten a lot better at computerized, face recognition technology.
Mhm.
So when they were at these events, they wore their COVID masks, um, and took a great risk, I think, to go see the Pope. But they love the Pope.
Wow.
They're
Mhm.
Chinese. They wanted to go, and so they did. And Gerard O'Connell, he did a very good podcast for Inside the Vatican with Colleen Dully, talking about he actually met some of the Chinese Catholics and got their perspective. Um, so there were several hundred of them there. On the whole, I think everyone looks at the trip as a very successful event. I mean, it was
Wonderful.
unique, and it
Mhm.
may be one of Francis's final long journeys. We'll see.
Okay.
Um, he's been using the wheelchair, obviously.
Mhm. Well, for our last point today, talking about people taking risks and the ultimate risk, we have an entire family beatified as martyrs. So on Saturday, in a small village in Poland, the Vatican Cardinal beatified Joseph and Victoria Ulma and their children. They were murdered by the Nazis on March 24th, 1944, and they were hiding 8 Jews in their home. Has an entire family ever been beatified before?
No, and this is something that is very unique. I was before the show, I was scrambling to try to get as much background as I could, and it seemed that there's a large group of Catholics from Poland who were
Mhm.
murdered by the Nazis for heroic acts like hiding Jews or working to help human dignity. And this particular family, the Ulmas, was pulled out of that group. They're going to have their own cause. Was
Okay.
was the idea, and um, this is sort of unprecedented because if you look, and I think we have a picture of the family. The father was a big photographer,
Here, I
and
can pull it up.
yeah, and so this is a picture of the 6 older children, but as you can
Mhm.
see, they are small children with Victoria, with the wife, and
Gosh.
young, beautiful family, farmers, small village.
Mhm.
Um, basically, you know, the kids were baptized, but they were before the age of reason, a lot of them probably, and um, so the idea that they would be beatified as martyrs, which to be, if you're a martyr, you don't require that one miracle that you would otherwise.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it is a very unprecedented thing, but I think it speaks to um, our salvation isn't just individual in the Catholic
Mhm.
Church. It's also communal. The
Mhm.
importance of the family is something that John Paul II obviously emphasized. And being from
Yeah.
Poland, I don't know if there's any any connection there. Um, it's only in the last couple of decades that married couples have been beatified or canonized together. This is quite significant.
Yeah, and then so in addition to the parents and then the 6 older children, the Pope decided to beatify their youngest child, who appears to have been still in the womb or born prematurely at the time of his mother's martyrdom. What's the significance of this?
Yeah, so I saw conflicting reports, and I know that Paul Fahey and Nathan Turowski saw some articles saying that basically at the time of her martyrdom, she was 7 months pregnant. Victoria gave birth to this baby. So I believe it was not the baby was born outside of the womb, but there was obviously no opportunity to baptize this child.
Mhm.
Um, and this is something that we've discussed before, the whole idea of where do unbaptized babies go when they die. And there was
Mhm.
this whole theory of the limbo of infants and not the possibility of salvation. And this beatification. Now, the I believe that the Congregation for Causes of the Saints said that either baptism of blood because of martyrdom or baptism of desire by the parents' desire to have the baby baptized uh, would fulfill that necessity.
Mhm.
Although, if you talk to some traditionalists, because they aren't of the age of reason, that that sort of baptism of desire by proxies wouldn't count. This, however, is a strong affirmation in an official act by the church.
Yeah, how
sort
she
of
thinks about all of this.
how the church thinks about all this, where the church's thinking has gone. If this results in canonization of the family, and canonization is considered an infallible act, this would be an infallible statement about an unbaptized baby being saved, being in heaven, which would be, I think it would be a pretty big deal, especially since there are Dominican priests out there who say that it's dogma that unbaptized babies go to limbo, which is on the outer rim of hell. And obviously the Catholic Church has been moving away from this, but to me, this strikes me as sort of a little clever, like, no, we are moving more towards the idea of an all-loving, all-merciful God who wants all of us to be saved. And you can't be condemned on a technicality.
Beautiful. So the Holy Father had something beautiful to say about the family. Can you share that quote with us?
Yeah, so he just at his Angelus yesterday, he spoke about them, saying they opposed the hatred and violence that characterized that time with evangelical love. May this Polish family, which represents a ray of light in the darkness of the Second World War, be for all of us a model to imitate in the zeal for goodness and the service to those in need. A round of applause for this family of blesseds. And then he said, and following their example, let us hear the call to oppose the force of weapons with that charity, the rhetoric of violence with the tenacity of prayer. Let us do so above all for the many countries that are suffering due to war. In a special way, let us intensify our prayer for beleaguered Ukraine. There are the flags there of Ukraine, he pointed to them, which is suffering so much. And also, I don't know if we clearly gave the narrative, and we'll link to it, but it basically, this was a town where all the Jews were rounded up, and those who wound up surviving the war were the ones that were hidden by villagers. And this family, for I believe 2 years, kept two Jewish families hid eight Jews in their house. And sadly, they were somebody turned them in. Nazis rounded them up. They murdered the Jews inside the Jewish family inside the house, and then murdered the parents in front of the children, and then murdered the children. So, obviously a lot of suffering, and we need to recognize all of that. I think that this and the chief rabbi of Poland attended the beatification as an official part of the ceremony, and I think, and they've been named in the past as righteous Gentiles. So. I think that this moment, it speaks to a lot of things. I think it speaks to the value of the family. It speaks against intolerance and anti-Semitism, and also it recognizes the dignity and the eternal life of those who are of innocence, like that child, like all of their children, really. And so I think.
And then also, speaking of innocence and suffering, today being 9/11, so we also. Remember and offer up all those who have lost their lives, especially on this. It's a significant day for our country in the United States. So, any closing thoughts on that front? Mike?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's been 22 years, and wow, I think it's been. I believe I was 21 when it happened. No, I had just turned 22 when it happened. So half of my life was before 9/11, and half of my life was after. So that's an interesting. I guess most of your life has been in a post 9/11 world, but so many things have changed. A couple of years ago, we published an article by Deacon Greg Kandra, who he's a popular blogger, and the Deacon's Bench has been a popular blog for 10 or 15 years. He underwent an entire conversion process, and so we had him. He was a CBS producer in Manhattan on 9/11, and it led his journey of deepening his faith and becoming a deacon. and he wrote a remembrance for us on the 20th anniversary. So we've been sharing that on social media, and it'll be in the show notes. So
wonderful.
If you want to reflect, and it's a very prayerful reflection,
Beautiful.
that would be a good thing to read.
Thank you. Thanks for everything today, Mike. Links, as always, friends, are available in the description. This conversation is brought to you by smartcatholics.com. It's the free online community for millennials, creators, and learners. Join the private Where Peter Is group to ask questions, share insights, and suggest topics for next time.
And visit wherepeteris.com to read articles, commentaries, and spiritual reflections by and for faithful Catholics who support the mission and vision of Pope Francis.
And like we said earlier, this is what happens when two volunteers get together to try and track the news and the coverage in the church. So we can't do it without your support. Please consider becoming a Patreon supporter for Where Peter Is to help us continue, and especially help Mike continue to bring you this show. So
and we've just filed as a 501c3 nonprofit, so there will be more information forthcoming. But starting, I guess now, the donations can be tax deductible through Patreon. I know we've got that lined up, and we'll have other ways to do that. So thank you very much.
Please consider supporting Where Peter Is, friends. Thanks again for joining us. And when it comes to news and controversies in the Catholic Church, stay curious, informed, and engaged. God bless.
God bless.